Republicans to end the Affordable Care Act, they are basically trying everything. There was a time when there was this historic, tension-filled moment on the floor when 3 Republican senators saved the Affordable Care Act. Senators Murkowski, Collins, and John McCain.
Indiana ended its 2021 fiscal year at the start of July with nearly $4 billion in reserves. Now, the governor said despite a crisis, Indiana exceeded all expectations and closed the state fiscal year with an unprecedented amount in reserves. They have an obligation to put this money back in the hands of taxpayers instead of leaving it in the hands of the government. The House Speaker also said that leaders and legislators are going to work with the governor's office to pass legislation during the 2022 session to help streamline the process and make an additional 910,000 taxpayers eligible for the credit. After the legislation passes, taxpayers will be paid either by check or through direct deposit, depending on how they filed the 2021 tax returns. Folks, checks will begin finally going out to people sooner than later. That's what we all wanted to see, and I'm glad it's finally happening. So here's some big news. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, has announced that Senate Democrats have a massive bill to address climate change, taxes, healthcare, and also inflation. They will move forward with it Saturday. They will move forward with this bill very soon. And right now, Democrats are trying to pass the bill under a budget process known as reconciliation. The process allows Democrats to pass the bill without the threat of a Republican filibuster. And all 50 Democratic senators are going to have to vote for the bill in order for it to pass, with a tie-breaking vote from Kamala Harris. The vote Saturday afternoon will be a procedural one to begin debate. Up to 20 hours of debate can take place, with that time split evenly between the two parties. It's likely that the full 20 hours would not be as needed, and as Democrats are expected to yield back a majority of the time. Then, friends, a process known as a vote-around begins, which means senators can reintroduce unlimited amendments to the legislation. There could also be a call for an entire 725-page bill to be read aloud. Schumer said on Thursday that he's expecting the process to take a long time. In his words, I quote, "I expect we'll have some late nights and extended debates on the floor." Now, before the bill can get to the floor, the Senate parliamentarian needs to complete the analysis of the bill to determine whether it can be allowed under reconciliation in the first place. And after that, passing the bill is still not guaranteed, as Sonoma has not yet signaled her support for it. Meanwhile, Republicans have criticized legislation, and McConnell has called it a goodie bag of environmental activists at the expense of working families. He also says the bill will provide no relief or worsen inflation. But data from the Congressional Budget Office shows that it would actually decrease the deficit by roughly $300 billion, and its impact on inflation in the immediate future is negligible.
Prescription drugs to seniors, to Americans all across this country, and that's why we've worked on bipartisan legislation that would include a cap on out-of-pocket costs. But what this bill does is not negotiation, and that is why I keep coming back to this, because the bill has a statutory ceiling price, which is tied to the drug's non-federal average manufacturing price. But the kicker there is that there's no price floor. So that means, as you think about a political appointee at Health and Human Services, the secretary, they get to decide what that price is going to be, and it could be well below the market value. There's nothing that would prevent them from making it as low as $1 and require companies to accept that price or pay an excise tax of up to 95% of the gross sales of that product. So, I would just highlight that there is negotiation in Medicare Part D. There's no negotiation between the plans, and if you the plans negotiate with the manufacturers. If you are in Medicare Part D, if you don't like your plan, then you have choice. What this does is it takes that away at the cost of innovation and breakthroughs and cures, which I outlined earlier, but just devastating at a time when there's so much hope. We all meet with the different disease groups that come to Washington, D.C. and walk the hallways, and they're just so in need and hopeful for research and what it's going to mean for saving lives, improving outcomes, curing diseases. And this legislation, according to many...
We also know that the Congressional Budget Office will score that, showing that there is no way to accomplish the objectives of this bill unless you audit the middle class. My bill simply puts in some teeth behind what is admitted by everyone to be the intention of the legislation, to say that none of the new IRS funding may be used to audit those earning below $400,000. If my amendment is not adopted, billions in taxes will be squeezed out of taxpayers earning below $400,000, according to the CBO, including middle-income workers and small businesses.
Madam President.
The senior senator from Oregon.
Madam President, I rise in opposition to my friend's amendment. We all agree here that taxpayers with less than $400,000 in taxable income should not face a tax increase. And there is language already, and I'd like to note this, in the enforcement section of the bill that says just that. But the Crapo amendment goes much further than that. It applies, and I quote here, to taxpayers with taxable income. And as Americans have learned recently,
whistling past the graveyard, as Danny Moses said on Tuesday night.
Well, you know, if inflation stays where it is, it's 8.5% CPI inflation through July. If it stays there, we got a problem. Because you're right, wages are rising 5-6% at most. So that means real wages after inflation is declining. It's cutting into people's purchasing power. Now they can manage that for a while because they have a lot of extra savings they built up during the pandemic because they were sheltering in place and not spending or got a lot of government support. So that helps tide them over. But they can't do that forever. So we do need to see inflation moderate. And that's why these inflation statistics we got on Wednesday and today are really very encouraging because they signal that we've seen a peak in inflation and inflation's headed in the right direction. But it has to continue to moderate. Otherwise, you're right. By Christmas, we're going to have a problem.
Hey, Mark, it's Jeff Mills. Quick question just relative to sort of this good news is bad news scenario. You know, how do you view what's going on in the labor market? Obviously, good news kind of underpins some of the fundamentals of the economy. But then to your point about inflation, it may embolden the Fed, maybe makes them think they haven't done enough. So how do you square all of that in terms of the impact on the economy and then obviously the markets?
Well, you know, I'm more of a good news kind of guy. I like jobs and creating jobs. And so that's really important. And the strong job numbers we got in July just show you how resilient the economy is and that it can take a lot. I mean, the pandemic, the Russian invasion, these are massive supply shocks. It's amazing our economy is still standing after suffering these two shocks. And the labor market is testimonial to that. Now, job growth needs to slow. I mean, unemployment's 3.5%. We can't see that go any lower. Otherwise, wage and